Wow. That was a marvelously comprehensive presentation of Kaplanist thought. What a pleasure it is to be in the company of people who know something and can indeed convey it with such clarity and, I would say, passion.
But it took me 40 years.
Right. No. It's fine. Your wife was keeping time, and it didn't take 40 years. It was beautiful. Okay, I'm sorry that I have to moderate because I have a few questions of my own, which means out of deference and respect, I have to go last, if at all. So I'll hold my questions. Dan, you had a question to ask.
If I answer Dan's question, he's going to write another book about what I say.
Well, thank you very much for a very learned presentation. I'm a great fan of Mordecai Kaplan, but I would like to ask you a question about the use of the term God, particularly in Reconstructionist liturgy. Presumably, during a Reconstructionist service, Reconstructionists recite the Amida prayer, as well as many others. And that prayer and other prayers make truth claims about God, about a transcendent deity who's also immanent in the world, who acts. Now, I can see that as a Reconstructionist, you might feel perfectly justified in reinterpreting the word God every time you pray, so that you don't mean an external deity who's immanent and transcendent, you mean something else. But I think it does look peculiar if the prayers themselves are making truth claims about the nature of God, and you don't believe those truth claims, yet you want to use the same traditional prayers that have been said by the Jewish people for hundreds and hundreds of years, making these truth claims. It does look as though this is really mental gymnastics and very misleading. I think it would also be terribly misleading to children who are, I'm sure, baffled by this. So I wondered if you could say something about this.
A very well put and profound question. First of all, you said you've been to Reconstructionist services, or you assume that there is a set pattern of Reconstructionist. Yeah, no, what I want you to know is that there is no such thing. Every Reconstructionist congregation that I've ever been to has its own way of doing things. There is no way. Kaplan started out in the 1920s with all of this stuff. The first official prayer book came out in 1948. At that time, he wanted to establish continuity. And I want you to know that he had a lot of problems with the liturgy, even with the Reconstructionist liturgy. He made some fantastic changes. Removing chosenness was a fantastic change, which modern Reconstructionists cannot even accept. They're not up to that yet. There were many other ideas that were... Excuse me?
Like Kol Nidre, for instance.
Absolutely. Changed Kol Nidre, many other things. There's no... it was a lot for that time. It was a lot for that day. If he were living today, he would make further changes. We have to work very hard at trying to maintain some semblance of continuity, and at the same time say what we mean and mean what we say. Now, you said it would be difficult for children. You know, I used to teach music to little children, and there's nothing that little children like more than nonsense songs, nonsense syllables. These things can be our collective nonsense syllables, our collective nonsense songs. Just as when we sing yabba yada yabba bibby bam or biddy biddy bam, these are the expressions of our people. We don't have to get so hung up on them. Now, I am a thinker of some... shh. I'm the guest. Be nice to me. We don't have to get hung up on the literalness of that we take everything. You know, the words Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, you know what they mean in Yiddish? Help! Have nothing to do with God. As Ayid Shrei Shema Yisrael, he's saying, help, Gewalt, that's all. Don't interpret it so literally. It means one God, and, he's transcendent, he's immanent. Nobody ever knew that. You have to understand what these things meant in the... Okay, now. So to come back seriously. Do you have a book out of this already? To come back seriously to this, Dan, we have to, out of respect for the past, because I don't want to break even with the ultra-Orthodox people. I don't want to break with them. They're Jews too. Very difficult for me to live with them. I think everything that's, but I don't, they're part of the family. Believe me, I have close relatives that I wish were not my relatives. But that's the way it is. That's the way it is. So I don't want to break completely. But that we must constantly revise. By the way, Kaplan never davened, and he davened a lot, but he never davened without a pencil. He would always cross out things in the siddur. He would cross out things in the siddur, change them, switch lines from here to there. And by the way, he had a wonderful sense of humor about the Siddur. When I used to sit next to him in the synagogue, he used to play tricks with the words in the Siddur. You know, let's not get hung up on it. But our worship must be fluid. By the way, I have a problem with the whole concept of prayer. The kind of God that we're speaking about is not a God that one prays to. It's a kind of, you try to get in contact with yourself, with the goodness in yourself and with the goodness in the world. The word prayer is not appropriate. By the way, I don't pray to God, I worship God. That is, I try to make myself really believe that goodness is the most important thing in the world, in my life and the life of others. That's a kind of worship. Prayer is a problem. Prayer is a big problem. I once said that we ought to call services, first of all, the word service is itself a bad word. Service. It's not, see, worship comes from the English word worth, worthship. We're getting in touch with those things which are of supreme value, of the greatest worth in our lives. Service, serving someone is, there are all kinds of problems. We have to be open to it. God forbid that Reconstructionism should be fixed. You know, let me just conclude with this. Students would study with Mordecai Kaplan, and if a student would give a sermon in class, Kaplan would criticize the student to death and say to the student, you come in next week with a new sermon and you incorporate the ideas that I gave you today. The student would come back next week and give the new sermon in which he quoted Kaplan verbatim. And Kaplan would criticize him to hell again. And the student said, but I just did what you told him. He said, but I've grown since last week. I've changed my ideas. Openness, fluidity. Go with the flow.
Marcia.
I gotta get in on this one because my blood pressure is rising.
I have some pills upstairs for you.
Never mind. Talk is just as good. It's better than pills. Listen, why is prayer always the bottom line that can't be touched? How come suddenly, there's you can answer me later, these are rhetorical questions. How come suddenly, this is really, I think, a compromise of intellectual integrity, and I'm going to get really I want to get really clear about this. How come we can say, yes, Hebrew is a language, yes, it's an important part of Jewish civilization, yes, words have meaning, and then when it comes to prayer, pull the Humpty Dumpty argument, as Humpty Dumpty said to Alice in Wonderland, when I use a word, it can mean anything I want it to mean. We can't do that, and it's not nonsense syllables. And letting our kids say the words as though they're nonsense syllables, you can do that in one of two ways. by not teaching them what the words mean, and there goes Jewish civilization, if they don't know what they're saying, if they don't know what the language means. So that's one way it can be nonsense. The other way is that you teach them these words do have meaning, but now when you say them, you're not going to use them as language. They're going to become a kind of mantra. And I would suggest that that is not how Kaplan would have answered this question. I agree with you that Kaplan would have, if he were here today, would be saying something different about prayer. I recently had a conversation a couple years ago with Ira Eisenstein, Kaplan's son-in-law, in which Ira said, and I quote this in my book because it's such a beautiful quote, I think, he said, Reconstructionists ought, he urges Reconstructionists not to have an I-thou dialogue in prayer. He thinks that prayer needs to mean something else.
I agree with you on that completely.
Yes, well, what that means, the two alternatives then are not to either say, that is not the source of our continuity, to say the old words and teach it as nonsense, or else we have no continuity. The challenge, and then I'll shut up, okay, the challenge, it seems to me, is to find the points of continuity with the old language and to be able to speak our truths in that evolving language. The point at which the language and its entire historical references no longer give us new ways in, we're either brain dead or we just give it up. But it seems to me that the challenge is to recreate prayer in such a way that it now is something that can evoke exactly those feelings of not just moral responsibility, but a sense of connectedness to this planet life that we're all a part of, which is not just a moral issue, but I mean, you talked about the heart, and I think it has a lot to do with raising children. So we need to really, I think without a liturgy that makes sense, we don't have a Jewish language. And unlike all the other books in our tradition, this is the one that's continually evolving and needs to be rewritten. You can't rewrite Tanakh. You can't rewrite Talmud. But the Siddur is the one thing that needs to be continually rewritten.
Marcia, first of all, I agree with everything that you said, but far more than that, I have the greatest respect for what you have done with the liturgy. I admire very much your work. I said I agree with everything that you said, but there's something that I want to add to it. Being Jewish is a social thing. And belonging to a group, and the group I mean now, not my particular synagogue or the Birmingham Temple, but I mean we belong to the Jewish people all over the world, and we belong to Jewish history. Therefore, every small cell within the group, every smaller group within the group, and every individual has to surrender a modicum of autonomy and independence, otherwise the group cannot survive. We can't change everything immediately. We have to, look, you can make suggestions and I can make suggestions, and I have very, very radical reformulations of many of the prayers. But you can't change everything all of a sudden without losing.
It's changing anyway.
No, just a moment.
Everything's changing.
No, it's not. Not every. No, not everything is changing. Not everything is changing. Yeah, but you want to have a radical break. You want to have a completely new type of worship immediately. You can't do that, and I'll tell you why. Although I teach my grandchildren about the God that I believe in, I don't want them to be unable to go into any other synagogue in the world and feel completely strange.
But I right now feel strange in all those synagogues. I can go anywhere in the world and feel equally alienated.
That's too bad.
And I know the liturgy. It's because I know the liturgy and it doesn't speak for me.
Marcia, we have to give something up so that we don't have that alienation. If every synagogue, just a moment. If every synagogue has a completely different type of worship, if children raised in one cannot feel at home in any other synagogue, then we're doing something wrong. You know,
I was raised traditionally, and I don't feel at home in standard synagogues. I know that liturgy, and that liturgy doesn't speak
I
for me.
don't
so I
like
need
the
something
liturgy,
else.
but I feel at home in the synagogues.
Well, good, then you don't need to change, but some of us do.
when
You're
I-
a man and she's a woman, and it's a
גם
problem.
זה חשוב.
Yeah, when it comes to
It's a problem.
right, Shulamit, I accept what you said, and in my synagogue there is complete equality. There's complete equality. I don't go with some of the panelists who want to give women more equality, but the same equality. In some synagogues, women want equal rights but not equal responsibilities. That doesn't go either.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Rights don't depend on responsibility. I'm sorry.
okay.
Not in a humanistic place.
Yes.
Rights are rights, and they are not under condition of responsibility.
Do you know something?
Basic
I believe
rights
that those.
are not under
I agree with you.
condition.
I agree with you. You're the jurist, not I. But what I'm saying is those rights perhaps should be rescinded from men too. Not everybody should be allowed to go up to the Torah and not be able to recite the bracha. You know the story.
Only Kohanim goes there.
You know the story of the gentleman who came up to the Torah. He joined a congregation. He gave the rabbi $10,000 for the synagogue. He said, Rabbi, it's on one condition. Don't you ever give me an aliyah, because I don't know how to say the bracha. Hat Gott geholfen. He came to the synagogue on Yom Kippur, and the shamus, who hadn't spoken to the rabbi, invited him for an aliyah. He came up to the Torah and he said, standing in front of the Torah, the rabbi standing beside him, he said, God damn it, Rabbi, I told you I didn't give you what else. And the rabbi said, Amen.
Okay. I think that segues nicely into a fresh question. Okay. Did you want to say something else?
I want to ask him something.
Okay, let's briefly, and then we want to. Okay, go ahead.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I think that you invented a new God. You made him Fartashen verkehrt or Fartashen verbissen. Because the Jewish God has evil in him, and he is very cruel and has no compassion, and he did terrible things. And you stood here talking of a God which is not the Jewish God. Maybe it's yours, but
Right.
it's not the Jewish God.
Okay.
And I want you to refer to it.
That's a good question.
That you're right, but I said that the God of the Tanakh and the God that Jews have worshipped throughout the generations, God is a projection of the best in us. The best in people, just a minute. The best in people in ancient times and the best in people today still contains a lot of evil in it. That's correct. But when I say God, I don't mean that. I have chosen only those aspects of the Jewish idea of God which to me represent the highest and the best. God to me means truth, justice, freedom, love. My God does not do anything evil. I don't believe in that kind of a God because
It's
God...
nothing to do with the Jewish God.
Yes, it does have to do with the Jewish God.
Okay.
Yes, it does have to do with the Jewish God in that my understanding of what God means comes from the Jewish tradition, but not only from the Jewish tradition. I said that. It's open to what I conceive to be the highest and best ideas available to us in our time. You can't, if I have to worship the God of the Tanakh, then I will become a complete secularist in Israel and fight religion. But I want to save, I want to preserve that in Judaism which is good and positive. I don't want all of it. This is the problem, folks. It's not all or nothing. Something is better than nothing. More is better than less. But all or nothing is bad. Nothing is bad and all is bad. It's not all or nothing. It's something. When I was a kid, I was sure that my mother was the most beautiful woman on the block. My father was the strongest. I grew up and found out that it's not the case, but I still love them more than any of the other parents on the block because they were mine. This is my heritage. But I don't have to say it's all or nothing. There are things in the Tanakh which I abhor, but I'm not ashamed of them because I know that they were wrong. My people has learned a great deal since then. That's all. So my God does not say kill all the Canaanites, and my God does not say kill all the Arabs. My God is the God of whom it said, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Hapayim v'Rav Chesed v'chulei.
Okay. Thank you. I want to call on Dan again, then Yaakov, and then I have a question, and then Ego.
The Hebrew, God is a compassionate God. You know the 13 divine attributes? They found the 13 ways of saying that God is love, compassion.
Oh, it's Christian.
No. Adonai, Adonai. God reveals himself to Moses. And at the same time, the words are pronounced. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Hapayim, v'Rav Chesed v'Emet, Notzer Chesed la'alafim, Nosei Avon. He forgives sin, v'Fesha, v'Chata'a, v'Nakeh. God is forgiveness, God is compassion, God is mercy, God is love. That's the God that I accept. There are things that when it says that God is cruel, mean, vengeful, I don't accept that. I have the right to do that and to call what I do accept Judaism. I don't take that right away from the ultra-Orthodox either. They want the whole hog. I don't want the whole hog.
Okay.
We're going to have to cut this a little shorter than I'm sure all of us would like because we're under several time constraints. So we've got to really wrap up this section in 5 minutes, and then we have to have a 10-minute break, which will be no more than 10 minutes, and then Tirza will speak, and she has to leave after she speaks. So we've got to move it along real fast.
Right. At the heart of this debate is a conflict, I think, between Reconstructionist Judaism and Humanistic Judaism. And I do vote in this debate for the humanists. I think that if you don't believe in God, if you do not believe in a supernatural deity, then it really makes much better sense to drop the word God, and I think Sherwin and the humanists are right.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I think that many people should drop the word God. I do not believe that my religion must be the religion of everybody. I think that humanistic Judaism, without God, is a valid, positive, creative way for many Jews. But don't you imply that what I'm trying to do is invalid or somehow inauthentic, because the supernatural God is not the only God. The history of philosophy, the history of religion tells me that many people throughout history have worshipped gods who are not supernatural. And excuse me, including Jews, great Jews like the Rambam, Maimonides, who tells me in the 13 principles of the faith, I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, blessed be, has no body, nor anything resembling a body, and yet God exists. Throughout the ages, the Jewish idea has been God is not this and not that and not that and not this, but God exists. Part of the Jewish quest has been trying to find out what God is. And one of the things that I found out that God is not, to my satisfaction, is supernatural, because there ain't nothing supernatural. There's nothing supernatural.
Okay.
There's only the natural. Therefore, God has to be immanent in the natural. There has to be something in us, and if it's in us, it's around us, that is worthy of our viewing as of ultimate value, of the greatest preciousness, and that, I believe, is the goodness in us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Manny. Yaakov, do you have a very, very brief, it's got to be very short, very short.
Since I believe that we created God,
Yes, we
in
did.
many, of course, and therefore as Jews we created many Jewish gods. There are evil gods, there are good gods, and there are even atheistic gods as the God that was described to us now by many. I think that this is exactly what he described. Atheistic in the sense that it's not a being that is outside of us or it's outside of nature. It's a being that not only we created but is in us. And a creation, and this is your interpretation, and I agree with you 100% of Kaplan, this creation of a God that is within us and naming our goodness by the name of God, which is a privilege of whoever wants to do it, I think precludes the possibility of praying to him.
Absolutely.
And therefore there's no question if it's this prayer or that prayer, there is no prayer.
But there can be worship. There cannot be prayer. I intimated that. There cannot be prayer, but there can be worship. We can say, we can come together and say, and with this I'll conclude. Pay attention, people of Israel, and each and every individual Jew. It is the eternal process making for creative communication between individuals and peoples. It is the power that makes for freedom, justice, truth, peace, love, loyalty, compassion, cooperation, and moral responsibility that is worthy of our worship and devotion, our commitment and our sacrifice. It is only the eternal. It is the eternal one alone. And that is what the Shema Yisrael means to me.
Okay, thank you. One very brief final question, then we'll break. Egon, did you have a question? It's got to be short.
I just wanted to ask about your organization. How many congregations have you got in the United States? I understood that you have some differences with a part of the establishment of the Reconstructionist movement.
That's putting it very mildly.
Well, how many groups have you, and
Egon,
have
are you
an
addressing
internal
me or
division? Yes or not?
the doctor? Are you addressing me?
No, no.
Talking to him,
Okay.
right.
No, I'll answer later.
It's about something like 75 to 100 groups now.
Okay,
And
good.
how many people?
I don't know. I don't
And
know.
in the world?
And in the world, not many more. It's a very
Israel?
very small movement. In Israel, none.
Right.
No, you were thinking of...
Okay.
Excuse me, that is not a Reconstructionist congregation. It is now affiliated with the World Union for Progressive Judaism. It has become Reform. Rabbi Jack Cohn, who is the rabbi there and who was my teacher, is a Reconstructionist, but the synagogue is not.
Okay.
He's the only
I was.
Reconstructionist there.
What?
He's the
The
only,
only, yes.
Reconstructionist.
Okay. I want to close by saying that I was just dying to say that, in my understanding, Kaplan got his idea of God from John Dewey. Okay. And if you read Dewey's Common Faith, you'll see that idea laid out very clearly.
I edited a book about that. It wasn't only John Dewey. As a matter of fact, Kaplan and Dewey lived only a few blocks away from each other, didn't know each other. But anyway,
Okay.
the book is out on sale in the vestibule.
Okay.